Joining us now is the leader of the Senate DFL caucus. We have Senator Tom Bakk. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on with you.
Senator, let's begin. In your view, why do you think voters returned control of the Minnesota legislature to the DFL?
Well, I think the Republicans had a serious messaging problem. It seemed like the only message that they had for Minnesotans were, well, we turned a $6 billion deficit into a $1 billion surplus. And Minnesotans didn't believe it. And voters are smarter than that. I think voters realize that the state has serious budget challenges ahead of themselves. And I think they understood that the Republican message in the Senate wasn't being honest with them. And I think contributing factor, of course, were some of the policy decisions that they made, doing away with things like the homestead credit, historic borrowing from our schools, trying to criminalize stem cell research, trying to limit women's reproductive choices. There was just a whole basket of policy initiatives that I think just did not reflect the mainstream Minnesota voter. And I think that's why they were turned out.
And with the constitutional amendments, how much of an impact do you think those amendments may have made on the outcome of this election?
Well, I think I always thought they were overestimating their impact on the Republican turnout. Republicans tend to turn out in a little higher numbers in all years. And I don't think putting an amendment on necessarily energizes their base. I think their base is going to come out and vote. I think what ended up happening was those amendments on there absolutely energized the Democratic base, and it gave them, many of them that were a little disillusioned with the president, they weren't as excited about the presidential race as they were in 2008, it gave them a reason to come out and vote. And historically, Democrats in Minnesota have always done better with higher voter turnout. So I think they badly miscalculated that issue, and I think Democrats probably benefited from it on election night.
And the House GOP leadership does say that the DFL message essentially has been higher taxes and more regulation. Is this your thought as well, particularly coming into a budget year? Can we expect some new revenue?
Well, I think clearly their message, and one of my criticisms of the Republican Senate was they just kind of never left the campaign trail in 2010. And you could have replayed their speeches in October of 2010 and the day that we adjourned in May of 2012, and it was the same speech. Not a penny more, no compromise, it's a dirty word. I think their message, frankly, was rejected by Minnesotans. I think Minnesotans understand there are very, very difficult spending decisions are going to have to be made. There will be additional cuts in the state budget. We're facing a $1.1 billion deficit in the next biennium, plus just nominal inflation of $1 billion. So it's a pretty daunting challenge for the next legislature. We've got about a $2 billion deficit to wrestle with, and that assumes we're not going to pay schools back the more than $2 billion that was borrowed from them. I think voters understood that. And I think voters understood that I felt a lot of angst in talking to candidates that were out knocking doors. They were hearing a lot about rising property taxes. And this shift onto the property tax, more and more dependence on the property taxes at the county and the city level and local school districts, that the state not being a good solid partner with our communities and with our schools, and forcing them to kind of go out on their own and raise their revenue locally. That's been the message since 2002 when Governor Plenty was elected. In 2002, property taxes in Minnesota were about $4 billion statewide. This year they're $8.5 billion. They have more than doubled in 10 years under Governor Plenty and then a Republican legislature. And I think that was rejected soundly. I think Minnesotans want a significant, serious tax reform proposal put on the table at the legislature and want to have a discussion about it, because there is a lot of angst, not only on the part of citizens, but on the part of the business community about these escalating property taxes. And we've got to have a conversation about that. I did reach out to the president of the State Chamber of Commerce today, had a conversation with him about the idea of tax reform. told him that this legislature was going to take that subject up, and I want the business community to come to the legislature with some ideas. Anything we do relative to tax reform, I think we need to make sure that it doesn't have any negative impacts on our economy, on our economic growth. Minnesota has a very, very strong business infrastructure, and we're in a hyper-competitive global economy. But clearly we have structural budget problems we have to deal with. And I know last session, the business community, it seemed like their #1 priority was to do something about the rising property taxes for business owners. So I'm looking forward to them bringing forward some ideas to the legislature, engaging them in the conversation in the House and the Senate and with the governor, and reforming this tax system so that it's more fair, more equitable, that it continues to provide for economic growth in this very competitive economy that we're in.
Senator, Governor Dayton did urge voters throughout this campaign to give the DFL a chance to lead. Do you feel now that there's any pressure to rubber stamp his proposals?
Well, the interesting thing about that is governors get the opportunity to put a budget together in a vacuum. They sit down with all of their department heads and they put a budget together. They'll put a tax bill together. And I know the Commissioner of Revenue has been traveling around the state. I give him a lot of credit, meeting with a lot of local chambers of commerce and talking about tax reform in Minnesota's revenue system, how we're getting this growing reliance on property taxes. And so they've done that, but largely they're going to get now to come back to the Capitol and in a vacuum put together a state budget and submit it to the legislature in mid-January. The legislative process is much different than that, because in the legislative process, that's where the public gets engaged. And bills get introduced and get scheduled for hearings, and there's opportunities for members of the public to come and testify and weigh in on proposals. So the discussion at the legislature will be much different than proposals that the governor puts forward, because that's really where the public input comes.
Okay, Senator, the GOP has stated, Speaker Zellers and Majority Leader Dean said that, at least from the House GOP standpoint, they intend to reach out and try to give input, especially when it comes to trying to balance the budget. And they're hoping that the DFL will take them up on that offer. What about you? If the DFL in the Senate, or excuse me, if the Republicans in the Senate extend a hand and say, we'd like to help with some input on this process, will you accept that offer?
Absolutely. I had a very good conversation with Senator Senjum last night, the current majority leader. Very conciliatory tone, wanting to work together on a smooth transition. Senator Ortman, the current tax chair, called me this afternoon. I haven't had an opportunity to call her back yet, but said if there's anything I can do to help the Senate function in an orderly way, she wanted to be able to do that. I do intend to call her back and take her up on that. I think the Republicans in the Senate learned a valuable lesson, and I think the House Republicans would be wise to learn from what happened to the Senate Republicans. That message that we will not compromise, not one penny more, was rejected by Minnesotans. And I think Minnesotans expect a balanced approach. They expect us to invest in our good quality educational system that has made us strong and made our strong business community, created all these Fortune 500 companies in this state. And investing in our people through our educational system, early childhood through higher education, is going to be critical to this state's success. And if that means we're going to have to find a little more money to be able to do that, then I think it's something that Minnesotans are willing to accept. I do not believe that Minnesotans are that tax averse. I think if they know where the money's going to go, and it's for something they support, like our K-12 school system, I think Minnesotans will understand that if at the same time we can take some of the pressure off of property taxes to fund their local schools, I think we'll find public support for that.
Okay, Senator Bakk, we are out of time. We hope to again get you in the studio closer to session. Thank you.
Thank you.